Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Career Insights into Knowledge Services in India, hosted by CFA Society India and CFA Institute. I'd like to take a moment to welcome our audience from around the world joining us remotely. I'm Rajendra Kalur, CFA Independent Management Consultant and Director on the Board of CFA Society India. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Before I introduce our speaker, I have a couple of housekeeping notes to mention. Today's webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes, including Q&A, of which 45 minutes will be the speaker presentation and last 15 minutes for Q&A session from the audience. We will be leaving time for Q&A after the presentation. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation. You can do so by clicking on the Q&A link at the bottom of your viewer and typing your question in the box. The webinar presentation will be available to view after the presentation concludes with a link in the chat box. We value your feedback, so please complete the evaluation survey before you sign off today. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Ravi Gautham, CFA Senior Vice President and Head, Northern Trust Asset Management. Ravi Gautham has served as the head of Northern Trust Asset Management's business unit in India since December 2009. He also serves on the executive management team and board of Northern Trust India subsidiary, Northern Operating Services Private Limited. He also is an executive committee member of the American Chamber of Commerce in India. Gautham is a CFA charter holder and a member of CFA Society India and CFA Society Chicago. It's a pleasure having you, Ravi. And over to you. You may begin your presentation now.
Thank you, Raj. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, and happy to be here this evening, and love to welcome you all as well. And hopefully you learn something. Hopefully I will learn something through the question and answer sessions, and we'll have a good discussion after my presentation. What I'm going to talk about today is the knowledge-based services that an ecosystem that we have developed in India that really caters to large financial institutions, small financial institutions, basically global institutions that have used India and have leveraged India because of its talent, because of the the employee base, as well as the significant technical expertise that's available in the market here for a very competitive price. And so what has happened is there's been an evolution in all of these large companies that have come here and are taking, are adding value to the system, adding value to themselves through this workforce. I'm going to walk you through, some of the, the industry landscape, some of the segments, some of the trends, some of the career paths available, as well as some future, future prognosis and outlook as we go forward here. If you think about, knowledge-based services, I think you may have heard of the term KPO as well. Simply stands for knowledge process outsourcing, to be differentiated from another term you may have heard, which is BPO, which is simply business process outsourcing or offshoring. And, that type of activity caters to more operational, repeatable type of activities when we talk about BPOs. For KPOs, it's more of higher value added work, more analytical, more thinking oriented, more judgment oriented. Think of research, think of, any other type of activity that requires more education as well as is more well qualified and more highly paid. That body of activity is in the KPO space. And what has happened over the years is that, large financial institutions have recognized the fact that we do have this employee base here that can be leveraged, and they have come here in droves to typically address the need that they have globally, and to basically have the work done in India for a global firm across legal entities and so on and so forth. So that has not just mushroomed, it has ballooned, and it is now a thriving industry that employs a lot of people. And I think the evolution of this industry has also been, it has worked in 2 or 3 different ways. I mean, initially there were some firms that came in here, for the cheap operational activity. And then they said they graduated into the value space and started doing other more high-end things. Some others came to India for technology because India has been a technology hub for a long time. And then they realized that they could be doing other kinds of work as well in addition to technology. And they backed into the business process outsourcing, which was some of the more rudimentary operational work. And then they graduated to the KPO space. In some cases, with some other banks, it's just been the reverse. I mean, they probably, outsourced some of this work to an Indian KPO that was providing them these services. And then they realized, we can be doing this ourselves. Once it was demonstrated that there was a talent available, there was the expertise available in India, they said, why should we be having a vendor for this? Let's just do it ourselves and grow it from there. And so once they did that, they backed into some of the operational activity and the technology activity. So there's been all kinds of movement in terms of how these firms have evolved. And typically, there are some of the largest names, any name you pick up globally on the banking side, the finance side, the insurance side, it's a very good chance that they have a large center in India with potentially thousands of people here. Now, what's happened again is with the evolution, they've come in small in some cases. They've actually ramped up the body of activity that takes place as they've learned and built confidence within their own companies in London, in Chicago, in New York, in Melbourne, in Sydney. As they've made the case each time, they've brought in more activity, experimented with newer types of things, and when it's worked, they've actually grown that. And as a result of this, they've really become very significantly large over the years. This industry goes back at least 20 years, and that is various types of evolution that have taken place. So we're going to focus on the what I will call the GCC, the Global Capability Centers, as they're called. If you haven't heard of that term, it's something that's bandied about a lot in industry conferences. And these are simply, think about them as fully owned subsidiaries of large foreign companies across the globe, whether it's in the US, whether it's the UK, Europe, Australia, wherever it might be. They've all set up spaces here, the Global Capability Centers, the fully owned subsidiaries. And we're going to talk about the ones that are in the financial space. The financial space, as you will see later on, is just 5% of the activity of the GCCs. Most of it is in the technology area, in manufacturing, in R&D, and other kinds of utilities, and so on and so forth. I'm just giving you, a macro look here, just to give you a sense for the kind of growth that has happened. And this is largely mirrored in the BFSI or the financial space as well. But here we're talking about in the blue box, the employment growth that's taken place. 7.5 lakh people in 2015, and 1.3 million now in 2020. So it's 75% growth in the number of employees that has taken place. Another staggering statistic is that we have 1,300 MNCs in India doing this kind of activity right now. 50 of them are large financial companies, BFSIs, and we're going to be focusing on those 50 and the kinds of things that they're doing. But that's the scale at which we're operating at. Revenue has gone from 19.4 to $33.8 billion for over that time period, 11% CAGR. So incredible growth, and companies have partaken in this and are experiencing the benefits of this ecosystem. Again, putting some other metrics into perspective, it's been hugely beneficial for India. Employment is, direct and indirect employment is something in the order of 5.5 million. Direct employment is about 1.3 million. But each job that's created in the ecosystem trickles down, and there's 4 or 5 other jobs that are being created, ancillary ones, whether it's security staff or janitorial services, whatever it might be. There's been a huge, explosion in the employment in those ancillary things as well. India benefits a lot because of the tax contributions. Approximately 5.5 billion in tax revenues coming from this sector, and then the GDP gross output as well is about 33 billion, as we talked about. But the indirect benefits, as you will see in this chart, are also staggering. So every job created brings up more, and every dollar sales leads to additional growth as well. Let's look at the the global financial services space. Like I said, there's only 50 of them, but they're large companies for the most part. They employ 2 lakh people in this segment, the financial services and the insurance space. 30% of that is insurance, but I will mostly focus on banks and financial institutions, and the ones that I'm most close to. That's the segment I work in, specifically in asset management. And then when you talk about these firms, who are these firms? I mean, like I said, it's all the big names you've heard of in your life. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citicorp, Northern Trust, State Street, Bonnie Mellon, Wells Fargo. I can go on, and all of them have at least a few thousand people in there. In the UK, it's Royal Bank of Scotland, it's Barclays, Standard Chartered, HSBC, Lloyd's, for instance, and then of course there's lots of European banks, SocGen and Credit Suisse, UBS, and so on and so forth. So I can go on endlessly on this, but I think it gives you a sense for who is in India. So everybody is in India. It doesn't mean everybody is doing business in India. In fact, the business component of some of these companies is minuscule compared to what they're doing, in their GCCs, and they're really here in India for their GCCs. It's not the business. Many of them have tried their hand in India on the business side, but they quickly realized that it hasn't been. It's getting a lot better these days over the last 2-3 years. But I think many have realized that it hasn't been worth their while and have left. You can come up with lots of names of asset management companies as well as banks that have been in India and have left for one reason or the other. And mostly the financials haven't worked. It hasn't been worth their while because of the size of the market, extremely small, and it just hasn't been profitable enough for them to be operating here. But they've discovered the GCCs and they're taking full advantage and fully benefiting from their presence in India in a fashion that doesn't face the market. There's no sales in India, but lots of revenue and revenue generation happening outside of India because of the India employee base as well. Okay. Now, again, as in any large distribution, I think, you have companies, for instance, like a JP Morgan and a Standard Chartered, firms like that with 30, 40,000 people, huge proportion of their employee base. Of course, they're large companies globally, with 3 lakh, 4 lakh employees worldwide. So 35, 40,000 might seem a small percentage of that, but it's in absolute numbers, it's extremely large. And you've got people, with 500 employees or so, or even less as well, on the lower scale. But overall, it's about 2 lakh employees. And I think this is the part that you will appreciate. 45% of those employees are actually doing operational activity, settling trades, transactions, striking fund accounting, NAVs, doing transfer agency work, foreign exchange transactions, so on and so forth. So they're doing all of the backbone. All of the backbones of these banks are being addressed by employees, Indian employees in the operations piece of each of these companies. And then lately, technology growth has outgrown just about everything else. They've discovered technology can be significantly addressed in India to a very great degree. And all of the latest things that are happening in that space are all being handled out of India. There's a lot of digital activity. I'll allude to that a little bit later. Robotics, you name it. All of us are benefiting from, the Western capital as well as some of the know-how in terms of furthering that and sort of, developing some of that on our own as well. Only 10% of the activity is really what I would call knowledge-based work. And by that, I mean work that involves, like I said, judgment, involves making calls, involves high-end analytics. Research would be something where you're either doing secondary or primary research, finding companies to invest in, doing some valuation work, collating information on the market space, risk modeling, financial modeling, a lot of quant, as in quantitatively driven portfolio management, where you are not really examining the financials of an individual company. You're going off of factors and so on, and to pick companies in a very mathematical way, breaking their performance down into attributable factors and then trying to figure out how you want to invest in those companies. So that's called factor-based investing. We do a lot of that. And that activity is growing as well, along with ESG and sustainability metrics. ESG is a buzzword that you're probably hearing a lot of. A lot of us on the asset management side are quite embedded in that, and that is becoming a big deal as well. So knowledge work would be anything where you are actually analyzing a balance sheet, analyzing an income statement, making sense of that for valuation, or any of these other things. And typically a large part of this knowledge work involves reporting of some kind, dashboards, for senior management, putting together a summary analysis of how the firm is doing, of what our exposures look like globally, and so on and so forth. So, I would classify all of that as to in the knowledge space, including some of the corporate functions like legal functions or treasury functions, risk management functions, auditing functions. All of that would be probably be bucketed in the knowledge-based activity that I'm referring to here. Moving on, I've talked about sort of the evolution of the GCCs. Today they are a very meaningful portion of the employee base. I've talked about that, and also they've become very mature. This business has been going on for almost 15 years or more, and of course we still have new entrants coming in, new large entrants coming in. Most of the action has happened in terms of large companies coming here, and they've sort of they're still growing, because if you think about it, a lot of these companies are huge and they're complex, and they've got lots of legal entities worldwide, and many of them tend to operate in a very independent fashion. So the growth in these companies hasn't really been, it's been more like a step function as it evolves. It hasn't been a very linear thing. So you might have one business within a certain company that says, we're going to go to India, we're going to start setting up something there, and we'll build out a team. Now, depending on the success of that or not, and depending on how it all generally plays out, and then the interactions as well as the discussions internally within the firm, other people get to hear about that in other businesses and other divisions. It hasn't been a very conscious strategy in a lot of these cases. Firms have allowed their divisions to do what they need to do and manage their P&L accordingly. And so people have come in at various stages within certain companies, unrelated to something else that came earlier on, and so on and so forth. And they sort of cobbled together a certain entity with lots of things going on inside there. And you might find in certain companies, a large portion of the business isn't represented in India at all. In some of the small ones, everything is here. And the people are in between in a lot of places. And of course, they're doing operations as well. They're doing technology as well in some cases. So it's a mix of everything that's taking place within this large entity called the GCC. And like I say in my second point, most of the award reflect and support a substantial set of activities conducted by the parent. And really in places where it has really succeeded, the India teams are just an extension of the global team. So you have a functional manager sitting in some onshore location. Increasingly, the functional managers for a global function are actually sitting in India. Not too many examples of that, but it's evolving, and it will just get larger and larger from here. Excuse me. But I mean that metamorphosis is also happening, which is a great sign for India's leadership, as well as the capabilities that some of these GCCs are delivering on the knowledge side, on the technology side. Lots of patents have been filed in some of these companies, in these engineering R&D companies in India, and so on and so forth. But then again, I mean, you can have smaller companies doing extraordinary things. You can have larger companies, just dabbling in operations for the most part. It's a mixed bag, and so, but I think the growth that we will see in this segment is going to be quite astonishing. And the simple reason for that is, despite what has happened already, we still have large portions of large companies that have been untouched, and we still have a whole bunch of companies that haven't come here yet. I mean, India is not the only game in town. We have a presence in Manila, for instance, a presence in Limerick, in Ireland. The near shore, as they call it, Poland, Romania, Hungary. And those are opportunities for people in Mexico. You've got firms like this, GCCs. So the GCC ecosystem is there all around the world. It's the most advanced and most robust here in India. And it's hard to compete with India in many cases, because we have the people and we have the talent, and we have lots of people. If you want to scale up, this is the place to be. If you want 500 people doing something in digital technology and in AI, you can actually find that with some hard work, but you can find that. You can't do that anywhere else. And so that's the overall kind of situation with where we are today in some of these GCCs and the maturity that they bring to the table. A lot of cutting edge work is being done in the technology space, whether it's in the financial space or whether it's in chip manufacturing, R&D, and GE aircraft engines. You've got sensors in the blades of the turbines being monitored here and built into that. There's extraordinary things that are happening, but it feels like it's low key and low radar. It's below the radar, and it is in many cases because not a whole lot of people are actually advertising what they do. If you look at this slide here, this talks about the evolution of our own firm, Northern Trust in India. And again, I'm talking more about the knowledge space only. We've got 7,000 people in India. Most of them are in operations, just like I showed you earlier. We've got a large technology team that's mushrooming as well, several hundred people. But then you've got the knowledge space in India, which is asset management, some of the treasury functions, some of the risk modeling functions, and all of that. And you can see how we've grown over time. Every year we'd add a few teams based on the success of the previous year. Some things work. For the most part, if you work hard at it, you can make it work. And bring the right talent in, bring the right with the right training and the right exposure to the business, and you can do extraordinary things. And I think if you look at the the breadth of activity here, you'll find that it's all over the place in terms of the kinds of things that the firm itself is doing in different global locations. Economists, quant engineered equity, treasury functions, liquidity risk, credit analysis for a banking book, for underwriting loans, product management, marketing support, securities lending, front office support, a lot of reporting type of activity, investment solutions, fixed income research, equity research. All of that is covered here over a period of time as we built it out. Again, I mean, and this is a nutshell of some of the revenue impacting activities in the middle. I refer to that. I mean, so if you're putting together pitch books, if you're putting together investment solutions for institutional clients, for high net worth clients, you're modeling a lot of that. You're stress testing those solutions and portfolios, and you put together a pitch book based on that particular client's needs. And that in a way we're not really engaging directly with the client, but we're engaging with the salespeople and the product people. And that results in a sale. You're directly impacting revenue. You're doing some great research. You're directly impacting assets under management because of the growth in the funds is because of the return. High skill capabilities are addressing that. Co-location on the top right is something that is, the synergies are being capitalized. I think one of the fascinating things I have learned about, firstly, large financial companies. I worked with them in most of my life, but I think the India situation is so extraordinary and so unique that you are actually having a ringside view of a firm right in front of your eyes. You would never have that advantage anywhere else, even if you were in headquarters. As I've argued, it's a paradox. If you're sitting in world headquarters, you see very little in some ways. You see what's given to you. And then everybody else is, of course, there's tens of thousands of people in headquarters. I mean, they're all in silos. They're aware vaguely of what's happening in other businesses. But right here in India, if you have a team of 10 people doing fixed income research and another team of 5 people doing quant equity research and fundamental research, and you see them all right there, and you see them, they're able to interact with each other, able to engage with each other in a way that is not happening in other locations. And so they become a lot more effective from that standpoint, banding ideas, sharing skills, and things like that. So co-location has been an extraordinary benefit. And so time zone proximity to APAC and EMEA, as I talk about here, is another thing. You're actually in real time speaking to people very easily, given the India location and the time zone proximity. And of course, if you're going to be working till 8 o'clock in the night, 9 o'clock in the night, you're speaking with North America as well. And so that's typically how we manage our business. People work in shifts, and so you can actually have a conversation if you need to. A lot of digital and automation analytics are in play. We're doing plenty of that. And so in a way, as I will get to it later on, the competition for jobs is also coming from the machines, and that's a hard one. And the machines are getting better and better. We are actually writing commentary on investment fund fact sheets and investment commentary using a machine and AI. It's not as good as a human being, but it's slowly getting better and better. We can get some good paragraphs of great information written by the machine. And so there's a lot of advancements taking place. And of course, because we're working for large, rich companies with tons of capital, we're better off than some of our Indian peers and the banks and the financial institutions here. We just have more to play with, more resources to throw at what we want to do, and all that has helped. Here's a picture of the world, and then we've got Bangalore here, which is where we're centered. We do have an office in Pune as well, a growing office where we have a technology presence. But you can see, each of these are some of our hubs in terms of where we do business. Mostly in Chicago, it's headquartered in Chicago. We have a big business in London as well. And then there's several other offices around the world, but these are some of the ones we touch on a daily basis: Hong Kong, Tokyo, Melbourne, Amsterdam, London, and Dublin. We're doing, in each of these places, we tell you what we're doing for that location. Multi-manager solutions and portfolio strategy for Toronto, which is becoming a hub for some of that for our global solution building space. It's all quantitative for the most part. There is a subjective overlay as well, but it's a lot of the stress testing on the portfolio is what is appropriate for a client, what is not, and all of that is put together there by individual pitches based on what the salespeople and the product people are asking for on that particular client. Chicago has the bulk of the activity supporting it, including all kinds of research, economic research, investment risk modeling, product management. All of those teams are represented here in India, and they work directly with their counterparts in other parts of the world. Going back to what is probably more interesting for you, the careers and career paths. One of the things, as you would have realized by now, is there is a huge breadth of activity. So it's not, there's individual businesses, and we have that represented here. So it's not, a place where you can say, can I go and do investment banking, for instance, a big term. There's lots of things that happen inside investment banking. But let's say you want to do research to find good companies, financial analysis, research to find good companies, so you can manage your money better if you're an asset management firm. You can do that in a GCC. Let's say you want to do, there's something called, now when you do research to buy a company for your mutual fund, that would be buy-side research, okay? You also have sell-side research coming from investment banks, which are basically trying to independently put out research to try and pitch ideas to the buy-side firms to get them to sort of invest in the companies they're pitching in, so that hopefully you will trade through them and they make their commissions. That's called sell-side research. And if you're in a large universal bank that does everything, you can do that as well. And then you can do all of the things I showed you in that evolution chart, right? So it's not as if you're trying to look for a career in a certain firm doing a certain thing, like a private equity firm will do private equity, an AIF firm will do alternative investment funds, and so on and so forth. But over here, you get it all. And so at the end of the day, it is a vehicle for exposure to all of that. You have to start somewhere. You have to get into a certain team, but there is an opportunity for people to actually move from team to team over a period of time, depending on the skills they exhibit and what might play out horizontally and vertically as they move up in their careers. So that's one of the advantages of a firm like this. And sort of in India, like I said, you have visibility into a lot. You're more connected to some of these other competing teams than you would be anywhere else. And so that's a big benefit. And so high levels of collaboration and engagement with onshore partners, and the visibility daily with those teams and senior people there. You have an opportunity to prove yourself. You have an opportunity to sort of be noticed, right? And we have actually placed a lot of people in foreign locations on a permanent basis. We have PMs now in London and Chicago. We have strategists. We have research analysts who have gone and been promoted and are working from other locations. So, I mean, those are some of the things that take place in these large firms. You've got more to play with. You've got more engagements, and you've more potential visibility. The one downside, like I say in point 3, is the hours. You're really not working the 9-to-5 job at all, because most of the world is not. Well, a good portion of the world is still available 9 to 5, but a lot of it is not. So depending on who you're engaging with, if it's an APAC engagement, you're dealing with Australia, that's 5 hours ahead of us. So you'd be up by 5 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning, you'd actually be working on a project for somebody in Australia. Of course, you're going to finish your day earlier as well, but you typically have these shifts that you are in if you're working on certain teams for a certain region. And that doesn't change. I mean, if you're working for an APAC engagement, you will be on that for the long term, unless you make a change to another location. And so if you happen to be working a lot with Chicago and headquarters in North America, typically you would start by noon or a little bit later and end by 9 p.m. Or so in the evening. And that way you at least get an hour and a half to attend some meetings. And typically people are good about moving all of their meetings to first thing in the morning when there's an engagement with an Indian team, so people can actually go to bed at a reasonable time. With more confidence, that develops with the teams producing this kind of output, you have more teams willing to sign on to come on to GCCs and become part of the GCC in India, and that's what's really driven a lot of this growth here. And so I mentioned this before, the core business, clearly very, very important. A large body of the work being done is actually for the business of the company. But then again, you've got a fair bit of corporate activity as well that's going on: finance, treasury, compliance, risk management, broadly across the enterprise. Those are things that are taken care of by the GCC as well. So the concept is the same. If you have a function, anywhere in the world, and you need help and support, in a very meaningful way, you can start with this, and then that meaningful way becomes much more central to the team. And it has created leaders, and some of these leaders are actually running those teams at this point after all the evolution we've had. I've covered some of this before, but I want to talk about some of the the structure of the teams. Generally, it varies from team to team and varies from firm to firm as well, based on their philosophy and the way they run things. But I think by and large, knowledge-based work, as can be ascertained by the numbers themselves. So I'm talking about 5% of the people are probably doing this activity. Most of them are operations and technology, as we saw. And that implies that the teams are generally much smaller. You don't need thousands and thousands of analysts to be analyzing a company. You need one to analyze a sector, or maybe two to analyze a sector, right? So, and then you scale that. You don't really have 2 or 3 people opining on a certain firm on the valuation. So that is an example of, and then if you look at the kind of activity I've shown you, we're not going to have dozens and dozens of people on each of these teams. So based on that, the hierarchies of, the management structure is very lean. You've got most people are actually individual contributors. The managers themselves, the team leaders above them, are doing some management, but they're also, clearly individual contributors of a very deep order themselves. And the people on top of them, the managers, I think that's really where it ends, are looking at multiple teams under their remit, right? And they are well versed in each of the team's activities, at a higher level, but clearly they have seen and they can actually go down very deep themselves, and they're expected to do that. And that's what the senior managers are, also specialists in a way. Now growth can come simply because you, in some ways, you're always a specialist. Okay, you've grown up as a specialist somewhere, but then in management, you've sort of broadened your horizon. You've taken on different things, and you are a little more aware of some of the other things that are going on to a greater degree over time. But you always remain a specialist in what you grew up in. And so that ethos pervades all of management as well. You're always known for something, and you've also become a manager. So you can grow both as a specialist, becoming more and more focused on your domain, getting better and better at what you do. And also you can grow as a generalist in management roles and becoming more of an executive type employee. As I've mentioned before, we've got people who've been placed in different locations. They're doing extraordinarily well as well in their own locations where they are, again, growing through the hierarchy in those locations at this point. And we're very proud of that. Talking about, the skills, I've talked very generally about some of these things at this point, given the necessity of doing so in a firm that's this large. But as you can imagine, in each of these different knowledge teams, there is a lot of specificity, and there's a lot of domain expertise and functional expertise required. Okay, and typically when we look for skills, I just want to show you something that the World Economic Forum talked about is the top 25 skills in 2025 and the top in 2020. I think it's a tall order, right? But I think clearly at the end of the day, ideally you would find somebody who checks off a lot of these boxes. Okay, and so really that's what we're looking for. Again, I'm broadly generalizing this, but if you look at some of these softer qualities that are displayed here, that's what you would be thinking about in terms of the kinds of skills we're looking at. Now, negotiation, well, depends on if you're a lawyer, if you're working in the legal team, or if you're in procurement and things like that. For instance, that would be something that would be important, not necessarily everywhere, and so on and so forth. So depending on critical thinking, analytical thought, creativity, social influence, teamwork, these are some of the things, the traits that transcend a lot of the team. And we're looking for that when we interview our people as well, trying to glean some of those personality traits that we can via, I wouldn't say a succession of interviews, but over at least 3 interviews, in terms of, having people talk to multiple people, so we can actually extract some of the feelings as well as some of the observations we have made on the softer side of things, in addition to having maybe a domain conversation as well early on as we're doing the interviewing for these roles. I want to touch on some of these more specific skills and themes as we go through this. I mentioned the broad nature of the activities, and so the requirements are very, very varied. But broadly, the softer skills are I wouldn't say we want to see a large portion of what you saw in the previous slide in terms of demonstrated traits in the individual, the sense of feeling you get as you're talking to the individual. As we're evaluating them. Now, on the intake side for junior analysts, for instance, here is another difference on the knowledge services side versus let's say the operations side, which, as you well know by now, is a multiple of the knowledge services side in terms of size, intake, and growth and everything else. So many of these operational teams, the vast majority of the ecosystem, are able to plan for new intake well in advance. Okay, so they can go into colleges, do some college hiring, maybe 50 people, maybe 100 people in advance. They have some visibility into the kinds of businesses they're winning, and because the business that they're winning is operations, it's more operationally oriented. It needs more hands on deck. Okay, so you can project the kind and the numbers of people that you want for, let's say, the next 6 months or the next year, based on the pipeline of the wins that you're having to do operational activity. For knowledge-based activity, that kind of luxury isn't available, right? And especially for people who have matured in the knowledge-based activity space. They've grown their teams, and now the only thing left is to sort of incrementally add to that, unless you actually add another whole new team doing completely different activity. And when you do that as well, you're only going to hire 5 or 7 or 9 people maybe to get that thing going, up and running, or maybe even less. So the college hiring is really not a very big deal for knowledge services. We can't predict what we need very robustly unless we actually plan for this. And if we plan for something, it's going to be 2 or 3 people, and we would typically rather get them from our sources, through referrals or from their, laterally from the industry. But one of the things that I would say demonstrates perseverance, hard work, intellect, analytical ability, and all of that. We're looking for some signals that come out of that. And for us, an easy way to do that is to say, okay, is a person part of the CFA program? Are they part of the FRM program? Have they passed level 1, for instance? How do they do in their coursework in college, in economics, statistics, or finance, or accounting? We're looking for something like that, clearly, because there's a huge talent pool. We can't be interviewing everybody, but to sort of whittle it down, we need some signals. And right there is one. So if nothing else, obtaining a CFA charter holder does a variety of great things for you. One of the biggest things it does for you is produce credibility for you, as well as sort of allows you to sort of get in through the door because you've already demonstrated something, improved something, and that gives you a better shot at getting a job that you can excel in. What has also become very, very prevalent for just about everybody in the workforce, whatever your background is to be more tech savvy. If you can, if you have got some programming background, if you can sort of manipulate data, if you can extract information, if you're curious about that, if you want to use Python, VBA, R, these are some of the things that we expect people to be somewhat conversant in, because it makes you very versatile. We can just throw you a problem to solve. You can go grab the data from the web or wherever it is. You can massage it. You can make sense of it. You can regress it. And those are the kinds of things that will really, really help in addition to whatever your degree is, that you're pursuing. So that is something to keep in mind, and that's becoming more and more important as we go along here. Because keep in mind, I started off saying, you're not just competing with others, you're also competing with the machines these days. And it's becoming important. Many of these jobs that are being done will not require a person to be doing it. And so the machine will take care of it. And so you got to sort of make sure that you're positioned in a way that you can bring the right kinds of value and bring the right kinds of things that an employer needs. Jack of all trades, but specialist in one. That's an important thing that I think about. You need to be good at certain things and be known for something. But given the nature of the situation right now, you need to be versatile as well. You need to be, like I said, demonstrating a lot of those traits, be a team player, good at collaboration with people, getting the job done. That would be the fundamental trends that would be required. Now, mid-level and senior level positions, there's obviously a lot of lateral intakes. There is, like I said, BFSI GCC ecosystem. It is mature. There is plenty of talent, and really we are, for most part, moving from one firm to another within that space. And again, one of the advantages of that hiring from within that ecosystem is that people have already been conditioned to that. They're conditioned to working at 8 p.m. in the night. They've dealt with different time zones. They work with the cultures of the West and so on and so forth. So I think it's made you get an employee who can hit the ground running, if they have got the domain expertise as well, in addition to some of these software qualities that we require. The last point, ability to juggle multiple priorities and stakeholders, collaborative teamwork across the globe and time zones are crucial to success. Again, more so for mid to senior level positions, but also for junior positions, because from day one, you're actually interacting with somebody on the other side of the world. So everything you do is noticed and observed. Talent pool and future outlook for careers, so really quickly on this one, before we get to some questions. Theoretical talent pool is very large. Effective talent pool is discerning employers is constrained. And so what I mean by that is some of the things I've touched upon before is the softer skills make the difference, the technology skills make the difference, your communication skills make the difference, especially because you will be engaging primarily with an audience that is not Indian. And so you have to write well, communicate well, for you to actually be noticed. And then strong domain skills, are ones that are typically checked for. They're some of the most important things to make sure that you're credible with what you know. So that is something that we'll be looking at, whether it's for junior candidates or whether it's for senior candidates. That's the first thing we talk about that comprises a big portion of the interview. Now, if you think about, there's lots of projections about, GCCs and their growth, which is all correct, which is all the future as well. And I'll explain that to you in a minute. Typically, one of the things that is, like I've said before, is that knowledge services, investment services have a structural issue, in the sense that the businesses can grow very significantly, but it doesn't mean the headcount is going to grow very significantly, because they're very scalable businesses. You have one investment idea, whether you're managing $100 million or $1 billion, your trade size is going to go up. You don't need 2 people or 3 people just because you've gone from 100 million to $1 billion, right? So that plays out across the board in knowledge services. And so while businesses have grown larger and larger and larger and more profitable, they're able to manage expenses because they don't have the headcount in the KPO knowledge services space. In the operations space, that is not yet true. There's a lot of automation and everything else, but you still have a more of a linear connection between the size of the businesses that are growing as well as the size of the employee base. But in this particular space, you can't rely on that. And what will happen though, and what we predict will happen, is that there is still a huge, vast amount of companies that have not come to India. So for right now, 25% of the Fortune 500, and these are the 500 biggest companies in the world, are actually located here and are doing work here. It drops to about 15% of the Fortune 2000, which would be the 2000 largest companies in the world. So about 350, 400 of those people are here. And then, like I said before, not all of them are utilizing India to its fullest capacity, right? Some teams are here, some teams are not here. There's more of that is going to happen. But importantly, I think new entrants to the GCC segment will come in, okay? And hopefully they'll come in given more friendlier government regulations in India and all of the other things that all need to fall in place, because there are still a lot of hurdles to come here and set up here. When that happens, hopefully we'll find more knowledge services, the pool of that expanding and everything else, simply because people are coming in, and existing people should be doing more in knowledge services where they're not, which will eventually happen as well. So I think that's the prognosis in terms of how knowledge services by itself, will make a dent and move the needle for employees in India. And again, the headwinds against some of that is the automation. With the passage of time, we're seeing a lot of things being automated. I talked about some examples, putting together pitch books, for instance, presentation decks. A lot of that information is automated in the sense that a robot will go grab the data from Bloomberg, do some analysis in Excel, make some nice charts, put it into a PowerPoint deck, and email it to somebody. Nobody touches it. The sales guy gets the email, or the product person gets the email. It's in the format that's required. The analysis is there, and no one has touched it. So we're at that point right now, which is clearly a headwind for some of the job creation. I talk about natural language processing, again, assisting us with writing investment commentary. But I think, to the extent that you are CFA charter holders, aspiring CFA charter holders, it will differentiate you in the talent pool. Simply having level 1, level 2, and of course clearing it and becoming a charter holder, there's nothing like it. You need to differentiate yourself. You need to produce that signal to show that you have actually done the hard work and you've made a difference, and that lets you stand out. And again, always remember about the technology angle and the analytical tools, and going above and beyond your own formal education. I mean, there's Coursera, there's 100 different places you can actually train yourself or become conversant and an adept. You don't necessarily have to be adept. You need to be well versed in some of the things that are happening on the technology side to stay relevant. I just want to sort of talk about, speaking of growth again. There is a slide here that talks to what I was just mentioning. The current market is at 33 billion. More of the same. So companies doing more of the same will add to that. Companies that haven't expanded everything, like I was saying, and sort of haven't brought in certain, maybe they're doing equity research, they're not doing fixed income research. That's an example of that. Then that will add to even more. This is the revenues, potential revenues, by the way, that Indian GCCs are producing. And then higher value work within the same GCCs. I mean, this could be, all kinds of higher value work, not just investment related higher value work. So we're talking now of existing GCCs in these first 4 bars. And then we've got to attract the new companies. Transactional work will come in first, higher value work will come in later, and the total potential could be up to 85 billion is the projection in terms of revenues that these companies are generating, up from 33 billion over this time span, 2025, 5 years. Again, I said, I pointed to the back up here, 25% of the global Fortune 500, 15% of the 2000. So it's promising. There's plenty more to go. So that tells you something about this. And remember, we're also competing with other locations like Manila in the Philippines, or like Poland and Warsaw and places like that. But by and large, I think we've proved the point in India, and it's a well-trodden path at this point. And so hopefully we'll get a good chunk of the penetration going forward. A little bit more here about on the same themes, 1,300 MNCs up from 1,000. Here's our projections at various CAGR, very aggressive, 20%, what would happen, 15% CAGR growth, what would happen, and so on and so forth. And again, translating that to economic impact for the country in gross output as well as tax contributions, all phenomenal figures, very, very huge numbers that we're talking about here at the end of the day. I'll stop there, Raj, and I'll happy to take questions at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi, for that insightful presentation. And as usual, our audience is completely keyed onto this presentation and have a lot of questions for you. So let me then start with the question relevant to CFA charter holders. And one of the questions that from the audience that's come in is that what we have seen is when you put up a job description and a qualification, you don't necessarily ask for CFA. So charter holders, I mean, you ask for a CA or an MBA. So, I mean, is that changing now, or how do you see? Because you mentioned about CFA in at least the BFSI sector being the key differentiator.
Yes, I think it's, at least as far as I can tell, and as far as I'm making, the decisions, and a lot of the companies are as well. I think the CFA is becoming a differentiator. It is more well known. Clearly, it's not had to run like a CA that's been around for 60, 70 years in India. And MBAs, of course, are very plentiful. But I think clearly having it, people know what it is. They, intelligent, educated, knowledgeable people in these roles across the ecosystem are aware of it now. And they're aware of the pass rates and things like that. So I think it is definitely beneficial to have it out there, or to allude to it if you're in the program, because it catches the attention of people.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi, for that. Also, coming back to the pay here, I mean, you mentioned about small companies, you mentioned about the larger companies, and you also mentioned that salaries at a certain level. So, but do you see a big gap between the salary levels across institutions, or how are they, I mean, structured? I mean, what do you see? I mean,
yeah. So, I mean, there is. It's an interesting question. There is obviously, it's a talent driven market, right? And it's obviously salary and price is a very important consideration there. You have people who've taken different strategies to this, right? And so I think they're learning in a way, because see, a lot of the people in the industry ecosystem grew up from an operations kind of mindset in a way that, like I said, a lot of operations work happened, and then they realized that they can do higher value work and even higher value work and so on. So that evolution has taken place. But in some places that mindset hasn't evolved to, market pricing and, this is the value of this job and so on and so forth. So I think you still have people who are somewhat all over the map. Some of these roles you can imagine are not very mature themselves. Okay, you probably have 500 people doing, fixed income credit research on, or maybe 50 people or 100 people doing on 81 bonds, for instance, alternative tier 1 bonds, right? And so they can be priced differently in various places. They don't know what they're worth. A hedge fund will come in and simply bid up the whole price for 5 of them or 3 of them. So it's all over the map. So I sort of hesitate to sort of throw out numbers, because you can be making 200% more in somewhat of an inefficient kind of talent market for a certain niche role, simply because you moved from one firm to another, and that firm was building up its team. See, that's a critical thing. When you're willing to start and build up a team, you're willing to invest, and go crazy with that, especially if you're a wealthy hedge fund or something like that. So it's getting better now. It's clearly getting better. There is, we have a fair idea of what is priced at what, but a lot of ambiguities in some of the pricing, especially on the higher end type of work that's taking place. On the lower end, for instance, I'll give you some numbers. If you're a junior fresher from college and you're exhibiting some of the traits and all of that on higher value work, you probably start out with maybe 6 lakhs, 7 lakhs, somewhere there in compensation. And of course, if you do well, you will grow from there. And this is, I'm talking about a person with no experience formally working, but I wouldn't even say it would probably be a tier 1 BCom, or economics or finance or statistics, with some CFA level 1 thrown in, something like that is what we would be offering, something like that, those amounts too.
Let's now talk about pivoting within the organization. Say somebody working in client reporting, wanting to branch out into research. Is there some kind of a scope, and what are the skill sets one needs to develop for that? And anything like a charter like CFA helps in that regard?
Yes, absolutely, it helps. And I think if you saw the evolution, you will see that there is a spectrum of activity going. Some are lower end roles, as you can see, some are very high end roles. And I think one of the fascinating things about this story is that you have all of this going on in one firm. You don't really have to move firms to take up bigger and bigger jobs. Okay, if you can demonstrate that you're growing yourself intellectually, you're growing yourself, maybe getting a CFA charter along the way, and you're asking the right kinds of questions and doing the right kinds of work. Easily, we've got examples of people going from client reporting all the way to something much bigger. And like I've talked about, people that we've exported to other locations as well, right? So you don't even have to leave. You're leaving the India entity, but you're joining the parent, for instance, and you're doing bigger jobs at the parent. So there's a lot of internal movement taking place for the right reasons, for the right people.
Yeah, so that was a question, the follow-up question for that, in the sense that what are the chances of going on site from being at an off-site location?
Yeah, so I mean, chances are, clearly. So you've got, let's say, about 150 people doing some high-end work. We've got about 15 people or 18 people at this point who have gone permanently. Okay. So, well, you would argue it's less than 10%. Yes, it probably is, but that's a very meaningful number. But that doesn't that doesn't take into account people who've gone there for shorter term assignments or who travel there a couple of times a year to be with the team and have meetings there and conduct training sessions and so on and so forth. So the opportunity for travel is always there. It's just, I was only referring to the people who have permanently moved and who've permanently been placed there. And by the way, they applied for those roles internally, right? So there was competition from other locations. And they won the competition, and obviously they were selected. And we made the necessary arrangements in terms of the paperwork and everything else to make all that happen.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi, for that. But there's an interesting question here in terms of, how, as a charter holder, say somebody wants to set up a KPO and by connecting into companies who don't want to set up their own facilities, but would like to use the services. Is that a possibility? Do you see that developing into a big thing? Yeah.
Yes, it's a good question. In fact, a lot of the well, not a lot, but there are several KPOs already in the ecosystem, and then there's been some transactions as well that have taken place, Moody's buying over Amba and now calling it Equity Partners and eValueServe, and there's still several KPO players in the ecosystem. They're doing well. It's a tough business because now they're competing against the firm itself that's trying to give them the business, right? So internally within firms today, there is a debate going on. Should we go the KPO route and outsource the stuff, or do we already have a GCC? We know other people are already doing it. This talent is available. Do we just do it ourselves in-house, right? It's a good debate because it's still a lot of work to do it in-house. You have to find a team, you have to find a manager, you got to make it work. There is still an opportunity for KPOs, to deliver the right value, provide the right client servicing, and take the headache off, especially for firms that have not yet ventured into India. I would say that would be the key thing. If people haven't done it for whatever reason, they're just apprehensive about the whole experience, that would be the way to do it. And KPOs have done that very effectively in the past, except that many firms have taken it in-house now.
So one of the beliefs is that largely KPO recruitment is in the entry level, and what are the lateral level placements that you do typically, and then what do you look out for in such cases, and what scope does it have for charter holders, and maybe not really steeped into finance background but having or pursuing a CFA charter in that regard?
Yeah, so in terms of lateral, as the industry is matured, there's lots of firms, like I said, and there's a lot of them are thousands of people. Again, knowledge services is more limited, but there is talent now, in play. in reasonable amounts, even for knowledge services. Okay. And like I said somewhere in the presentation, lateral moves largely are happening within the same ecosystem because people are comfortable with the kind of work that they've done before, and they're known firms, known quantities, they have high standards. There's some level of screening that's already taken place because someone is successful at another place, and so on and so forth. So the lateral piece of it is very prevalent from within the ecosystem. But that doesn't mean we're not taking people from other places, whether it's Indian industry, whether it's especially for corporate roles, right? If you are a finance person, finance is finance. You're not steeped in the business. You're doing finance or legal or auditing for a firm, and those jobs are very fungible. You can go to any industry, any sector. So I mean, there's plenty of opportunity for that kind of talent as well. I don't know if I exactly answered the question, Raj, the way you asked it, but that's what I got out of it.
Yeah, large part of it is covered, I would say. And yeah, the one I think critical question is about, these are, transnational companies, with a huge diversity, and the fact that, it's a different challenge altogether, working from a remote background, and maybe cultural aspects that needs to be taken. I think one of the interesting questions that's asked is how, how deeply do you look at the onboarding process? And how do you help people from various backgrounds coming in India get acquainted with a multicultural, diverse organization?
Yeah, a good question. I think that was true in the earlier days, but if you think about right now, Northern Trust in India is 7,000 Indians. Okay. And if you think about any JP Morgan in India is 40,000 Indians, right? Now you're coming into a company, it doesn't smack you in the face that you're somehow different. You're working with the culture and the people you sort of know already. Okay. Now the engagement with the external, countries and everything else, they have also become steeped in this. I mean, they can pronounce Indian names. They've come across hundreds of people already. So the ecosystem overseas has matured as well to deal with India. Okay, it is not a novelty anymore. Now, this was a great question from maybe 10 years ago, but right now, and especially because of our technology expertise worldwide, Indians are very visible everywhere in large companies at very senior levels, and done a ton of examples of CEOs as well, right? So it is not a novelty anymore. There is nothing to adjust to, and so it has become a very homogeneous kind of, accepted fact. Yes, we're very conscious of diversity and inclusion. We take extraordinary steps, in terms of male, female, gender representation, the handicapped, as well as Army, ex-Army, and all kinds of different BRCs, which are the business resource councils that we have, Pride, and then, gays and lesbians and everything there. So it's a melting pot, and we're very progressive. Most companies like ourselves are. So you don't really feel alienated in any way, even dealing with external locations or even internally.
Yeah, Ravi, we are actually running out of time, but one last question that I would request you to answer in this regard is, people would like to know where to search for jobs. Where do you advertise, and what are the portals that you use? Are job portals available with the CFA Institute and the society portals useful for that? Do you do postings there? So what are the various channels that are available for people to know about job availability?
Yeah, so I would say that yes, the CFA portal is also one avenue. We do IIM jobs as well for these knowledge roles. IIM jobs is also very popular, and it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. I mean, if it's a popular portal, a lot of people go there, and because a lot of people go there, you sort of post it there. It sort of takes some time for some of these portals to evolve, and I think that's true of the CFA Society as well. So we do that, and then of course there is those are good. Those are two good sources right there. We do post on our own websites, the company websites. Very easy to find on LinkedIn. Very easy to find northerntrust.com careers. And that's true of all the competition also. Finding the jobs is not a very difficult thing if you focus on certain companies and go to their own websites and see what the hiring is. And then important to see the external portals as well, especially IM Jobs, for instance, because that's where we are probably posting on when we know we can't find that talent internally, especially if it's something new, especially if it's something different we haven't done, you know, and so on and so forth. Or you can write to Northern Trust, you know, there's emails, you know, and look them up as from that perspective as well.
Yeah, thanks. That's useful. And with that, we bring you know, this a session to a close almost. We just have a few announcements to make. Again, Ravi, really thanks for your time and taking your time out, sharing your insights, very valuable. And as a reminder, let me also remind you that in the Future of Finance report of CFA a couple of years back, the KPOs is where I think the place to be for CFA charter holders. It's going to be the biggest a sector where jobs are going to be placed for CFA charter holders. So that is how important the knowledge-based KPOs are at this point in time. As a reminder to our listeners, please do complete the evaluation survey that appears on your screen at the end of the session. Also, CFA Institute and CFA Society India members may claim professional learning credit by logging in their online professional learning tracking tool. Of course, there are a series of upcoming webinars now. Please don't forget to register if you have not done it already. The one that's coming immediately in 2 weeks' time is the CEO's Insights Toolkit for Consistent Compounding by the very famous Saurav Mukherjee. Then we have upcoming events on 12th, our marquee curtain raiser for the year 2022 India Investment Conference, the Era of Disequilibrium. That's a virtual conference on 21st and 22nd January. So please do register. Links are going to be posted on the chat site. Again, Alpha Summit of APAC. That's again an investment summit for CFA Institute Asia Pacific. Again, a virtual conference, 10th to 11th February 2022. Link to be posted and you will find it on the chat site. So with that, we bring this evening to a close and thank you for participating. Thank you all for your time.